So yeah, good to see everyone. Good, and as Mike says, good to see so many people on the call today. And I guess it's it's people in Manchester who kind of see the potential for themselves, helping to address the cost of living crisis. And I've got sort of 10-15 minutes and a few slides to go through, so I'll try and do this at the right sort of pace. But as Mike says, it's been recorded, and we can share the slides afterwards as well. So if you miss any of the detail, you can come back to the slides. So I'm Chief Executive of Greater Manchester Poverty Action, and we work to address poverty in Greater Manchester by supporting stakeholders with those efforts. And one of the things we've been saying quite a lot recently, really, is obviously there is very much a cost of living crisis hitting at the moment. But there's been a cost of living crisis for low-income households, for many low-income households for a number of years now. And I guess one of the reasons why these huge sort of increases in energy costs, but also food costs and other costs, is so kind of detrimental to people is because it's in the context of lots of households actually struggling along on low incomes for quite a number of years now, without sufficient support from the state, without the ability to save, to help tide them over when costs do rise, as they are doing now. So the context is particularly sort of important and particularly kind of challenging, I think, for kind of lower income households. So what I'm going to do is just say a little bit about Greater Manchester Poverty Action, just give you some sort of good context in terms of poverty levels in Greater Manchester, just so we've got that kind of shared understanding, shared sort of starting point. I'll say a little bit about what the cost of living crisis is, but I think one of the breakout sessions is going to be looking at kind of what you're all hearing and experiencing and seeing on the ground. So I think I won't say a huge amount there, because I think there's a lot of collective knowledge in the room that will really bring that to life. And then I'll talk a little bit about the kind of what we can do, and I will go into a little bit of detail around there. Obviously, not got all the answers, and it's not an exhaustive list, but I'm going to sort of highlight 2 or 3 things that I think we could really focus on in Manchester to help ease the situation over the coming months. So at Greater Manchester Poverty Action, our vision is of a Greater Manchester free from poverty, and it's really important we have that kind of big sort of vision statement, but we recognise there's an awful lot that needs to happen to get to that point. And of course, a lot of the big levers for addressing poverty do sit with central government. So we do seek to support national campaigns that aim to tackle poverty at that kind of national level. In Greater Manchester as a whole, these figures come from our Greater Manchester Poverty Monitor, and there is data specific to Manchester City Council area on there if you want to go away and look at the detail. But in Greater Manchester as a whole, 620,000 people are living in households with incomes below the poverty line. People perhaps be aware there's around 2.8 million people living in Greater Manchester. So a really significant proportion of residents living in poverty. And that figure is probably an underestimate as well, because it comes from some national government data around sort of poverty at UK level. So it's almost certainly an underestimate of the total number. And poverty manifests itself in different ways and has different consequences related to health, education outcomes, experiences in the labour market. And I think probably worth sort of saying that even before the cost of living crisis and the big surge in energy bills that we're seeing this year, energy bills were already causing real problems for people. And one of the things that we report on the Poverty Monitor is causes of debt, using information provided by Citizens Advice, and energy bills were one of the top causes of debt recorded by Citizens Advice last year. So already kind of a significant kind of pressure on households ahead of these increases that we're seeing now. In terms of the cost of living crisis, as I say, I think people are going to discuss kind of what they're seeing and what they're experiencing through their own work. A couple of things I suppose just wanted to kind of highlight really. There's lots of data, lots of information being thrown at us at the moment around the cost of living crisis, what it means in terms of prices, what it means in terms of impact on people. Couple of things really, I think, is there is some evidence that the cost of living crisis is hitting sort of the north of England or the north of the UK harder than the south. So some of the price rises we've seen have been greater in certain parts of the country, but also where you've got more of a concentration of low-income households, there's a disproportionate impact of rising living costs on areas where you've got large number of sort of lower income households. So it's a bigger hit. There's fewer households can absorb these rises in living costs in places like Manchester compared to, say, some places down in the southeast, more affluent areas. So it's a particular problem for areas like Manchester and other areas in the north of England. So in terms of the kind of what we can do about the situation, there's just a few things I wanted to run through. I mentioned the Greater Manchester Poverty Monitor previously. So that's a resource that we provide on the GMPA website. It's got lots of data about poverty levels across Greater Manchester, broken down by borough, so across the 10 boroughs, but also where possible, broken down to a more local level, more neighbourhood level. So it might be electoral ward level or other kind of neighbourhood level where the data allows us to do that. And you might think, well, what does that mean in terms of responding to the cost of living crisis? But one of the reasons we do the poverty monitor, why we produce it, is to provide stakeholders like yourselves with an evidence base for making a case for their services. So I think using that data to really pinpoint and focus and target responses to poverty and responses at the moment to the cost of living crisis is really useful. And we get some really good feedback on the poverty monitor from people working in the public sector and people working in the voluntary community sector on how they're using the data to sort of make a case for their services, whether it's about making a case to internal stakeholders like trustees, or whether it's about making a case to funders, or whether it's about thinking about how they target the services that they want to provide, or design policies in a way that recognise and reflect the particular sort of challenges certain communities face in respect of poverty. So I really encourage people to use that as a resource if they're looking to sort of make that case at the moment, or thinking about how they design interventions to respond to poverty. Do make sure you make use of that. In terms of the sort of the crisis response to the cost of living crisis, it very much is a crisis, and it's very much something that's going to hit people over the coming months. The sort of four main kind of areas of consideration for me. Firstly, one of the things we always say as Greater Manchester Poverty Action is that we need to take a cash first approach to tackling poverty. So we default to giving people money, putting more money in people's pockets before we do anything else. So that might be through local welfare assistance schemes that are run by councils. So we often say to councils, you need to be providing people with money rather than energy vouchers or food parcels, because people on low incomes have got multiple needs. They're the best place to understand how they make that money go as far as possible. So the prioritising getting money in people's pocket is really important. And I think from a voluntary community sector point of view, it's thinking sort of innovatively and creatively about how you do that yourselves, and also making sure that you work as part of the system that is prioritising that cash first approach to poverty and getting money in people's pockets where possible. Benefit and debt advice and effective signposting and referrals is obviously really crucial, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the money advice referral tools that we're developing across Greater Manchester. There's definitely a role in terms of learning from the pandemic. I think sort of on the positive side, the way organisations in many parts of Greater Manchester worked effectively together, and certainly at the start of the pandemic, some of the barriers that we might often face to partnership working and taking forward joint responses to particular issues seem to be easier to overcome than they often have been in normal times. And so that kind of learning from partnership working, the what didn't go so well, but also the what, but particularly the what went well, I think is really important. And I think it's really important that the public sector sees the cost of living crisis, like say, sees the cost of living crisis as akin to the pandemic, and really takes an open approach to working with partners and facilitating voluntary community sector organisations to play their part in responding to the pandemic, to the cost of living crisis. And then related to that point, I think it's really important that we spend some time thinking about the role of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector, because often the sector is playing that kind of crisis point response role. but the sector does have a really important role in helping think about strategic and policy responses to challenges like this, and helping to design those and create a system that responds effectively. So it's not just about the sector being at that kind of endpoint and providing that kind of crisis provision. It's about playing a broader strategic role, and certainly organisations like MAC and organisations like ours seek to create that space for the sector to have that input. And I think it's really important that the public sector kind of recognises that role. So just a few things in terms of sort of practical kind of responses. I mentioned on the previous slide the kind of the benefit uptake element to it. I think one of the things, we know that the benefit system in this country isn't by any means generous enough. So there's lots of households who are taking up all the support that they're entitled to, but still that's not enough. I mean, that's the case for many households. We also do know that there's an awful lot of benefits in this country that go unclaimed. So there's lots more money that we could get in people's pockets in Manchester that we're currently not doing. And obviously organisations like Citizens Advice and others play a really good role in sort of addressing that at the moment, but there is more we can do. Now, some of the data around sort of benefit uptake, particularly at a local level, is a bit patchy. One of the things the government does publish is an annual figure on the total amount of pension credit and legacy benefits. So that's the things that are being replaced by universal credit, or have largely been replaced by universal credit over the years, that goes unclaimed each year. So that currently stands at £16 billion. So that's just pension credit and legacy benefits. Of that, some work by the Combined Authority recently has produced estimates of non-take-up of pension credit across the 10 boroughs, and in Manchester that amounts to £17.6 million worth of pension credit going unclaimed in the city. There's things like sort of passported benefits that people can access. Support people can access it through receipt of certain benefits already. So Healthy Start vouchers is an example of that. And the take-up in Manchester reported by NHS is, sorry, someone's just coming a bit loud there. If people can mute themselves. So the take-up rate for Healthy Start vouchers in Manchester is reported at the moment at 73%, which actually is higher than it's been previously, but there is some issues around the way that data is collected. So I think in reality it's probably lower. So there's a large proportion anyway of low-income families with young children who aren't claiming Healthy Start vouchers. So that will amount to sort of millions of pounds worth of benefit, that benefit going unclaimed across Greater Manchester each year. There's lots of other support that people can access, passported benefits like Sure Start maternity grants, for example, for the first child in a low-income family, that go underclaimed. And then there's wider support, things like £1 discounts, accessing the best tariffs for utilities, hardship grants that are available, but often little known about or little understood. I think supporting people to access those things is really, really important. Another kind of key area, particularly important for families with school-age children or nursery-age children, is accessing childcare support. And there are different types of childcare support available to households, to families, depending on their income level. So for low-income households, they can claim support in terms of through universal credit for childcare. There's also free hours support available for families with children in nursery. And for households on more modest middle incomes, they can claim 20% towards childcare costs through tax-free childcare, and that's really underclaimed. A lot of that doesn't get taken up by families because it's little known about and hard to access. And then you've got the sort of the local welfare support offer. So councils, most of the benefit system sits at central government level. Councils are responsible for a number of areas of the welfare system. So council tax support and reduction, discretionary housing payments, local welfare assistance schemes, and at the moment the Household Support Fund, which is often being administered in partnership with the existing local welfare assistance scheme. But councils at the moment have got extra money from central government to support people who are at risk or facing a financial crisis. And we've done quite a lot of work with councils during the pandemic to support them to get some of that money to free school meal eligible families during the school holidays, and that's been quite successful. So there is sort of a range of different sort of financial support available to people, and the challenge is often the lack of sort of knowledge of that support and how to access it that acts as a barrier. Very much sort of linked to that is the work we're doing at Greater Manchester Poverty Action on our money advice referral tool. Money Advice Referral tool is based on a cash first, advice first approach to poverty, and it seeks to address the underlying causes or issues facing a household. It's very simple to use, and at the moment it's targeted at all referrers to food banks, with a view to making sure that before anybody is referred to a food bank, they get that kind of benefit advice, debt advice, other advice and support that they need to respond to the underlying issue that's causing them to face financial difficulties. So at the moment, we've got the Money Advice Referral tool running in Oldham and Tameside, and we're currently in the process of developing a Money Advice Referral tool for Manchester, working with partners, and that'll launch in the next month or two. And that's something that we're finding very much in Oldham and Tameside. Its use is going beyond simply referrers to food banks, and I think we'll find that in Manchester over the coming months. So just to say a little bit more about the Money Advice Referral tool, at the moment, if you haven't got a Money Advice Referral tool in place, a person presents with an emergency food need, they're referred to a food bank, that immediate need is met, but the underlying issue persists. And then with the Money Advice Referral tool, what we seek to do is that we use the tool to identify the issues behind why someone's struggling financially. Referrals are then made to the relevant organisation to address that issue or issues, and then ideally the underlying issue is being addressed. So in a kind of simple example, it might be that someone who's using Money Advice Referral tool is signposting someone to a local welfare assistance scheme and making sure that someone's claiming council tax support in a way that they might not have been doing previously because they weren't aware of that support or weren't aware of how to signpost or refer someone into that support. So that'll be coming out in Manchester in like I say, in the next month or two. We're just drafting that at the moment.